It was just another Tuesday morning, and David was already running behind schedule. He stumbled out of bed, grabbed yesterday's coffee mug from his nightstand, and rushed to get ready for work. The alarm had failed to go off again, which meant he had exactly 25 minutes to shower, get dressed, and make it to his office downtown. David had been living in the city for about 6 months now. Moving here from his small hometown had seemed like such a good idea back then. Better job, opportunities, more excitement, a chance to start fresh. But now, rushing down the stairs of his apartment building every morning, he sometimes wondered if he had made the right choice. The building where he lived was one of those old warehouses that someone had converted into apartments. It had character. His real estate agent had said. What she really meant was that the walls were thin. The heating was unpredictable, and you could hear your neighbors sneeze 3 floors away. David lived on the 3rd floor, apartment 3A, and he had gotten pretty good at timing his daily routine to avoid running into too many people. Not that he didn't like people. He was just naturally quiet and making small talk with neighbors while carrying a cup of coffee and trying not to trip down the stairs wasn't his strong suit. He preferred to keep his head down, offer polite nods when necessary, and get on with his day. As he rushed down the metal staircase that morning, David's mind was already at work. He had a presentation to finish, 3 client calls to make, and somehow he needed to figure out why the marketing campaign for their biggest client wasn't performing as expected. His boss had that look yesterday, the one that said someone was going to have to work late to fix things. But then he heard something that made him stop. It was crying, soft at first, like someone trying to muffle the sound. David paused on the 2nd floor landing, his keys jangling in his hand. The sound was coming from apartment to B, right below his own place. He had seen the girl who lived there a few times in the hallway. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with long dark hair that she usually kept in a ponytail. She always seemed to be carrying art supplies or books, and she had this quiet way about her that reminded him of himself. They had never really talked, beyond the occasional good morning or have a nice day. David wasn't even sure of her name. But now, standing outside her door, he could hear that she was definitely crying, and something about it didn't sound right. He checked his watch. If he left right now, he could still make it to work on time. His presentation was important, and his boss was already not too happy with him. The smart thing to do would be to keep walking, mind his own business, and let whatever was happening in apartment to be sort itself out. But David's grandmother had raised him better than that. She used to say that when you hear someone in trouble, you don't just walk away, son. She would tell him, there's too much walking away in this world already. Sometimes you got to be the person who stops and pays attention. The crying got a little louder, and David realized it wasn't just sadness he was hearing. There was something else mixed in with it, fear, maybe, or pain. He had a younger sister who was diabetic, and he remembered those scary nights when she was little, when something would go wrong with her blood sugar and she would cry in a way that made his parents drop everything and rush to help her. This sounded like that kind of crying. David knocked gently on the door. Hey, are you okay in there? The crying stopped immediately. For a long moment, there was complete silence. Then a voice, weak and shaky, called out, I'm fine. Please just go away. But she didn't sound fine at all. Her words were slurred, like she was having trouble forming them properly. David had heard that before too, with his sister, when her blood sugar would drop to low or spike to high. I'm David, from upstairs, he said, trying to keep his voice calm and friendly. You really don't sound okay. Can you open the door? Again, silence. David pressed his ear closer to the door and realized he couldn't hear any movement inside. No footsteps, no sounds of someone getting up to come to the door. Just that weak breathing that seemed to be getting slower. Every instinct told him something was seriously wrong. He pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight, then got down on his hands and knees to look under the door. The gap was small, but it was enough in the thin beam of light. He could see a person lying on the floor just inside the apartment, not moving. David's heart started racing. This wasn't just someone having a bad morning. This was an emergency. He immediately dialed 911, his hands shaking as he spoke to the dispatcher. I need an ambulance at 420 to River Street, apartment to B. My neighbor is unconscious on the floor of her apartment, and I can't get inside. The dispatcher asked him questions. He tried his best to answer. No, he didn't know her medical history. No, he couldn't get inside. Yes, she had been responsive just a few minutes ago, but now she wasn't answering. While he waited for the paramedics, David kept talking to her through the door, hoping his voice might help keep her conscious. He told her help was coming, that everything was going to be okay, that she just needed to hang on a little longer. He wasn't sure if she could hear him, but he kept talking anyway. When the paramedics arrived, they had to break down the door. David watched from the hallway as they rushed inside and immediately got to work. One of them called out numbers that sounded serious, while another started setting up equipment he didn't recognize. As they brought her out on a stretcher, David got his first real look at his neighbor. She was pale, almost gray, and seemed much smaller than he remembered. But just as they were loading her into the ambulance, her eyes opened for just a second. She looked confused and scared. But when her gaze found his face in the crowd of paramedics and curious neighbors, something changed in her expression. It was just a moment, maybe 2 seconds at most. But David felt like something important had just happened, like an invisible thread had been stretched between them, connecting to strangers who had never even properly introduced themselves. One of the paramedics came over to him as they were getting ready to leave. Good thing you called when you did, the man said, pulling off his gloves. Diabetic emergency. Her blood sugar was through the roof. Another RN. He didn't finish the sentence, but David understood. As the ambulance drove away, David stood on the sidewalk in his work clothes, his briefcase in one hand and his phone in the other. He was definitely going to be late for work now. His presentation would have to wait, and his boss would probably have questions. But none of that seemed to matter anymore. He had just helped save someone's life, and somehow, in that brief moment when she had looked at him, David realized that his own life had just changed in ways he couldn't even begin to understand. David couldn't stop thinking about what had happened that morning. He tried to focus on his work, but every few minutes his mind would drift back to the image of his neighbor being wheeled away in that ambulance. The paramedics' words kept echoing in his head. Another hour end. He didn't need to hear the rest to understand how serious it had been. By lunchtime, he had made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of eating at his desk like usual, David found himself driving to the hospital. He told himself he just wanted to make sure she was okay, that any decent person would do the same thing. But deep down, he knew there was something more pulling him there. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and floor wax, with that underlying scent of cafeteria food that seemed to exist in every medical building. David approached the information desk feeling awkward and unsure. How do you ask about someone when you don't even know their last name? I'm looking for a young woman who was brought in this morning, he told the receptionist. Diabetic emergency from 420 to River Street. I'm the one who called the ambulance. The woman behind the desk gave him a knowing look. You must be talking about Lisa Chen in room 314. She's been asking about you, Lisa. So that was her name. David felt oddly relieved to finally know what to call her. Room 314 was at the end of a long hallway line with those motivational posters that hospitals seemed to love. Hanging there with a picture of a cat dangling from a tree branch. Every day is a gift next to a sunset. David wondered if sick people actually found those comforting or just annoying. He knocked softly on the door frame and peered inside. Lisa was awake, sitting up in bed, looking much better than she had that morning. Her color had returned to normal, and her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She had been reading a book, but when she saw him, she immediately set it aside. You came, she said, and David could hear the surprise in her voice. I wanted to make sure you were okay, he replied, suddenly feeling self-conscious. I hope that's not weird. I mean, we don't really know each other, but after this morning, It's not weird at all, Lisa said quickly. Actually, I was hoping you would come. I needed to thank you properly. David pulled up the visitor's chair and sat down. You don't need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same thing. Lisa shook her head. No, they wouldn't have. Do you know how many people walked past my apartment this morning before you stopped? I could hear footsteps in the hallway, people going about their day. And nobody else noticed anything was wrong. She was right, and David knew it. In a city of thousands of people, it was easy to become invisible, to assume that someone else would handle whatever problems arose. He had almost done the same thing himself. What happened? David asked. I mean, if you don't mind me asking, Lisa sighed and looked down at her hands. My insulin pump malfunctioned during the night. I've been diabetic since I was 12, so I usually catch these things pretty quickly. But lately, she paused, seeming to consider how much to share. Lately, I haven't been taking very good care of myself. There was something in the way she said it that made David think there was more to the story. He waited, not wanting to push, but hoping she would continue. Moving to the city was supposed to be this great fresh start. Lisa continued. I got into art school, found that apartment, thought I was going to reinvent myself. But it's been harder than I expected. I don't really know anyone here, and I've been feeling pretty lost. When you're feeling like that, it's easy to let things slide. Skipping meals, not checking blood sugar as often as you should, staying up to late working on projects. David nodded. He understood that feeling of being lost in a new place, surrounded by people but somehow still alone. When my pump started acting up last night, I knew something was wrong. But I was so tired I just thought I'd deal with it in the morning. By the time I woke up, I was already in trouble. I tried to get to my emergency supplies, but I was too weak. That's when the panic set in. I heard you crying, David said softly. I was scared, Lisa admitted, really scared. I live alone. I don't have any close friends here yet, and I realized that if something happened to me, it might be days before anyone noticed I was missing. That's a terrifying thought when you're lying on your kitchen floor feeling like you might pass out. David felt a knot form in his stomach. He had lived in the same building for 6 months and had never made an effort to get to know his neighbors. If not for his grandmother's voice in his head that morning, he might have walked right past Lisa's door too. The doctor said you saved my life. Lisa continued, looking directly at him now. She said that the level my blood sugar had reached was extremely dangerous. If you hadn't called when you did, she didn't finish the sentence. But she didn't need to. They both understood how close it had been. I keep thinking about that moment when I saw you in the hallway, as they were taking me to the ambulance, Lisa said. I was so confused and scared. But when I saw your face, I felt this weird sense of relief. Like, this person actually cared. Enough to help me. This stranger who didn't owe me anything chose to get involved. David felt something shift inside his chest, a warm feeling he couldn't quite name. I'm just glad I was there, he said. But you weren't just there, Lisa insisted. You made a choice. You could have assumed someone else would handle it, or that I was just having a bad day, or that it wasn't your problem. Instead, you stopped and paid attention and acted. That takes a special kind of person. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing what had happened. David realized that this was the most honest conversation he had had with anyone since moving to the city. There was something about the circumstances that had stripped away all the usual social barriers and pretenses. I have to ask, Lisa said suddenly, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Did you ever make it to work this morning? David laughed, eventually. My boss was not thrilled that I was 3 hours late, but when I explained what happened, he actually seemed impressed. Turns out his daughter is diabetic too, so he understood how serious it could have been. I'm sorry I messed up your day, Lisa said. You didn't mess up anything, David replied firmly. You gave me the most important day I've had in months, maybe years. As visiting hours came to an end, David promised to come back the next day. Walking back to his car, he realized that something fundamental had changed. For the first time since moving to the city, He felt connected to something bigger than his own daily routine. He had helped save someone's life, and in doing so, he had discovered something he didn't even know he was missing. That night, David called his grandmother and told her the whole story. She listened quietly, then said, "I'm proud of you, honey. You listened to your heart when it mattered most. That girl is lucky you were raised right." But as David lay in bed that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was the lucky one. True to his word, David returned to the hospital the next evening. This time he brought something with him, a small sketchbook he had picked up from the art supply store near his office. He wasn't sure why he had bought it, but something told him Lisa might appreciate having something creative to do while stuck in a hospital bed. When he walked into room 314, Lisa was staring out the window at the city skyline. The late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the buildings, and she seemed lost in thought. She turned when she heard his footsteps, and her face immediately brightened. "You actually came back," she said, and David could hear genuine happiness in her voice. "Of course I did. I said I would." He held up the small bag in his hand. "I brought you something. I wasn't sure what you might like, but I figured an art student might want to draw." Lisa's eyes widened as she opened the bag and saw the sketchbook. "Instead of pencils inside, you bought me art supplies?" She looked up at him with an expression David couldn't quite read. "Nobody has ever done something like that for me before." "It's nothing special," David said, suddenly feeling embarrassed. "I just thought you might be bored sitting here all day." "It's perfect," Lisa said softly, running her fingers over the smooth cover of the sketchbook. "Thank you." David settled into the visitor's chair, the same one he had occupied the day before. There was something comfortable about being here, something that felt more natural than he expected. "How are you feeling today?" "Much better. The doctors say I can probably go home tomorrow if my blood sugar stays stable." Lisa opened the sketchbook to the first blank page. "They also gave me a lecture about taking better care of myself, apparently. Nearly dying gets you moved to the front of the line for medical advice." David laughed. "My sister would agree with them. She's been diabetic since she was 8. And she's always telling me about the importance of staying on top of it." "You have a sister with diabetes?" Lisa looked up from the sketchbook with interest. "Yeah, Amy. She's 24 now, works as a teacher back in my hometown. She's the one who taught me to recognize the signs. When I heard you crying that morning, something about it reminded me of the sound she used to make when she was little. And her blood sugar would crash." Lisa was quiet for a moment, then began sketching lightly on the paper. "It's funny how life connects things, isn't it? If your sister wasn't diabetic, you might not have recognized that I was in trouble. I never thought about it that way, but you're right." David watched as Lisa's pencil moved across the page, creating lines that were already starting to form into something recognizable. "What are you drawing?" "The view from this window," Lisa said, glancing up briefly before returning to her sketch. "I've been staring at it for 2 days, and I finally figured out why it caught my attention. See that building over there, the tall one with the blue glass?" David looked where she was pointing. "Yeah, the office building. That's where you work, isn't it? I can see it from my apartment window too. I used to watch people coming and going from that building every morning while I had my coffee. I probably saw you dozens of times without knowing it." The thought gave David a strange feeling. All those mornings, rushing to work, focused on his own problems and deadlines, while Lisa had been watching the world from her window, feeling invisible and alone. They had been living parallel lives, so close to each other, but completely unaware of the connection that was waiting to happen. "I used to draw the people I could see from my apartment," Lisa continued, adding details to her sketch. "Not in a creepy way, just I was fascinated by all these individual stories happening around me. Everyone rushing somewhere, carrying their own worries and dreams. I make up stories about where they were going, what their lives were like." "Did you ever make up a story about me?" David asked, curious. Lisa smiled, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "Actually, yes. There was this guy I'd see sometimes, always carrying a coffee cup and a briefcase, always looking like he was running a little late. He seemed kind of lonely, like he was still figuring out how to fit into city life. I used to wonder what his story was. That's pretty accurate, David admitted, the running late part especially. The lonely part too, Lisa asked gently. David considered the question. Yeah, that too. Moving here has been harder than I expected. I thought I'd have figured it out by now, made friends, felt more settled. Instead, I've been kind of stuck in this routine where I go to work, come home, watch TV, and repeat. I know exactly what you mean, Lisa said, setting down her pencil for a moment. That's part of why I let my health slide. When you're feeling disconnected from everything, it's easy to stop taking care of yourself. Like, what's the point? They sat in comfortable silence while Lisa continued sketching. David found himself watching her hands as she worked, noticing the way she held the pencil, the confident strokes she made even while talking. There was something calming about watching someone create something from nothing. Can I ask you something? Lisa said suddenly. Why did you really come back here yesterday? And today? I mean, you barely knew me before all this happened. David thought about the question carefully. He had asked himself the same thing multiple times over the past 2 days. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. Part of it was wanting to make sure you were okay. But there's something else. When I saw you in that ambulance, when you looked at me, I felt this connection that I can't really explain. Like we were supposed to meet. Just not under those circumstances. Lisa stopped drawing and looked at him directly. I felt it too. Even though I was scared and confused, seeing your face in that crowd made me feel less alone. Like someone actually cared what happened to me. I did care. I do care, David said. Which is weird because I don't usually get involved in other people's lives. I'm more of a keep to myself kind of person. So am I, usually, Lisa said. But maybe that's the problem. Maybe we've both been so focused on keeping to ourselves that we forgot how good it feels to actually connect with someone. A nurse came in to check Lisa's vital signs, interrupting their conversation momentarily while the nurse worked. David found himself thinking about what Lisa had said. She was right. He had been so careful about maintaining his independence and privacy that he had isolated himself completely. After the nurse left, Lisa returned to her sketch, and David found himself talking more openly than he had in months. He told her about his job, his struggles with feeling like he fit in at work, his relationship with his family back home. Lisa shared stories about art school, her dreams of becoming a professional illustrator, and her fears about whether she was talented enough to make it. By the time visiting hours ended, Lisa had finished her sketch of the city view, and David had learned more about his neighbor than he knew about most of his co-workers. As he prepared to leave, Lisa tore the drawing from the sketchbook and handed it to him. I want you to have this, she said, as a thank you for saving my life and for coming to visit and for listening. David looked down at the sketch. It was beautiful. She had captured not just the buildings and skyline, but somehow the feeling of looking out at a big city and wondering where you fit in. This is incredible, he said. Are you sure you want to give it away? I'm sure, Lisa said. Besides, it's not really giving it away. It's sharing it with someone who understands what it means. As David walked to his car that evening, carefully carrying the sketch, he realized that something significant was happening. For the first time since moving to the city, he felt like he belonged somewhere, not because of his job or his apartment, but because of this unexpected connection with someone who understood exactly how he felt. Tomorrow, Lisa would go home, and their daily hospital visits would end. But David had a feeling that this was just the beginning of something important. The day Lisa came home from the hospital, David found himself hovering around his apartment, listening for sounds from downstairs. He had offered to drive her home, but she insisted she could manage the taxi ride herself. Still, he couldn't shake the worry that something might go wrong again. Around noon, he heard her door close and footsteps moving around apartment to B. The familiar sounds of someone settling back into their own space, keys being set down, bags being unpacked, the refrigerator door opening and closing. David realized he was holding his breath, waiting to make sure everything sounded normal. An hour later, there was a soft knock on his door. When David opened it, he found Lisa standing in the hallway holding a small plate covered with aluminum foil. "I made cookies," she said, looking slightly embarrassed. "Well, I made them yesterday before I left the hospital, in their family kitchen area. I wanted to do something to say thank you, and I know it's not much, but you didn't have to do that," David said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "But I'm definitely not going to turn down homemade cookies." Lisa smiled, and David noticed she looked much more like herself now. The color was back in her cheeks, and she seemed steadier on her feet. Chocolate chip. "My grandmother's recipe. She always said food was the best way to show people you care about them." "Your grandmother sounds wise," David said, accepting the plate. "Would you like to come in? I was just making some coffee, actually." "I was hoping you'd want to come downstairs instead," Lisa said. "I wanted to show you something, and I could use the company. Being alone in that apartment after everything that happened, it feels a little strange." David understood immediately. The place where you almost died probably didn't feel very welcoming when you returned to it alone. "Give me 2 minutes to grab my keys." Lisa's apartment was smaller than David's, but it had much more personality. The walls were covered with her artwork, sketches, paintings, and what looked like pages from graphic novels in progress. Books were stacked everywhere, not in any organized way, but like they had been read and loved and set down wherever was convenient. It felt creative and lived in, so different from David's own neat but impersonal space upstairs. "This is where it happened," Lisa said quietly, pointing to a spot near the kitchen. "I woke up on the floor right there, not really understanding what was wrong." David looked at the spot, imagining Lisa lying there alone and scared. "How does it feel being back?" "Weird," Lisa admitted, "but better with you here. I keep thinking about how different things could have been if you hadn't stopped that morning." They settled on Lisa's couch, sharing the cookies and coffee David had brought down from his apartment. The afternoon sunlight streamed through her windows, highlighting the dust motes floating in the air and casting warm shadows across her artwork. "Can I show you what I was working on before all this happened?" Lisa asked, getting up to retrieve a large sketchbook from her desk. She opened it to reveal pages of detailed drawings depicting city life, people waiting for buses, sitting in coffee shops, walking dogs, talking on phones. Each drawing captured not just how people looked, but somehow what they might be feeling. A businessman checking his watch with worry lines around his eyes. A young mother pushing a stroller with a tired but content expression. An elderly man feeding pigeons with a gentle smile. "These are incredible," David said, studying each page carefully. "You really see people, don't you?" "I've always been a watcher," Lisa said, "probably because I was shy as a kid. Instead of jumping into social situations, I'd hang back and observe." "You learn a lot about people that way." "What did you observe about me?" David asked, curious about her perspective. Lisa flipped to a page near the back of the sketchbook. There, in careful pencil strokes, was a drawing of a man walking quickly down a sidewalk, coffee cup in hand, briefcase in the other. The face was turned slightly away, but David recognized himself immediately. "I drew this about a month ago," Lisa said. "I used to see you walking to work from my window. You always looked like you were carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." David stared at the drawing. It was him, but seeing himself through Lisa's eyes was strange and revealing. "I had no idea I looked so serious." "Not serious exactly," Lisa said. "More like lonely, like you were going through the motions of life, but not really enjoying any of it." She was right, and David knew it. He had been going through the motions, had been for months. Work, home, sleep, repeat. No real connections, no joy, just existence. "I think I was lonely," he admitted. "I just didn't want to admit it to myself." Over the following weeks, David and Lisa fell into an easy routine. He would stop by her apartment most evenings after work, sometimes bringing dinner, sometimes just coming to talk. Lisa would show him her latest artwork, and David found himself sharing stories and thoughts he had never told anyone else. David learned that Lisa was working on a graphic novel about urban isolation, about people living so close together but feeling completely alone. She had been struggling with it before her medical emergency, but now, with David's friendship, she was finding new inspiration. "It's funny," she said one evening while working on a new page. "I was trying to write about loneliness, but I didn't really understand hope until I met you." "What do you mean?" David asked. "Before, my characters were all stuck in their isolation. But now I realize that connection is always possible. Sometimes it just takes one person being brave enough to knock on a door." David had started looking forward to these evening visits more than anything else in his day. Work became just something he had to get through before he could go downstairs and see what Lisa was working on. She had a way of seeing the world that made everything seem more interesting, more full of possibility. One Saturday, Lisa suggested they explore the city together. "I've been living here for almost a year, but I've barely seen anything beyond the route to school and back," she said. "Want to be tourists in our own city?" They spent the day wandering through neighborhoods David had never visited. Despite living here for months, Lisa brought her sketchbook and drew everything that caught her eye: street musicians, interesting architecture, people walking their dogs. David found himself seeing the city through her eyes, noticing details he had always walked past before. "You know what I realized today?" Lisa said as they sat in a small park, watching the sunset. "What's that?" "I used to think living in a big city meant being anonymous, being invisible. But maybe it's actually about finding the right person to be visible with." David understood exactly what she meant. With Lisa, he didn't feel lost in the crowd anymore. He felt like he belonged somewhere, with someone who truly saw him. That night, as David climbed the stairs to his own apartment, he realized that Lisa had given him something he didn't even know. He was missing not just friendship, but a sense of purpose, a reason to pay attention to the world around him. He had saved her life that Tuesday morning, but somehow she was saving his right back. 6 months had passed since that life-changing Tuesday morning, and David could hardly recognize his own life anymore. What had started as a simple act of being a good neighbor had grown into something neither he nor Lisa could have imagined. They had become inseparable, but not in a clingy way, more like two puzzle pieces that had finally found where they belong. David's organized, practical nature balanced perfectly with Lisa's creative, spontaneous spirit. She taught him to notice the beauty in everyday moments while he helped her stay grounded and take better care of herself. The biggest change was in their living situation. After spending so much time in each other's apartments, it seemed silly to maintain two separate places. Lisa's lease was up for renewal, and when David suggested she move in with him, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Are you sure?" Lisa had asked. "I mean, I have a lot of art supplies, and I'm not the neatest person. And sometimes I stay up late working and might make noise." Lisa, David had interrupted, laughing. "I've been spending every evening in your apartment for 3 months. I know exactly what I'm signing up for." Moving in together revealed new layers to their relationship. David discovered that Lisa sang while she painted, usually songs she made up on the spot about whatever she was working on. Lisa learned that David was actually an excellent cook, something he had never bothered with when he was living alone and eating takeout every night. "You've been hiding this talent from me," Lisa said one evening, watching David prepare a meal that looked like it belonged in a restaurant. "I used to cook for my family back home," David explained, "seasoning the vegetables. My mom worked late shifts at the hospital, so I learned to make dinner for me and my sister. I guess I just got out of the habit when I moved here. Well, I'm officially spoiled now," Lisa said, stealing a piece of carrot from the cutting board. "I was living on sandwiches and instant noodles before you came along." Lisa's health had improved dramatically since the medical emergency. Having David around meant she never had to manage her diabetes alone anymore. He learned to recognize the early warning signs of blood sugar problems, kept emergency supplies in his car and at his office, and helped her maintain the regular eating schedule that kept her levels stable. But more than that, having someone who genuinely cared about her well-being had motivated Lisa to take better care of herself. She realized that her health wasn't just about her anymore. David worried when she skipped meals or forgot to check her blood sugar, and she didn't want to put him through the fear of another emergency. I never understood how much easier it is to take care of yourself when you have someone to take care of yourself for, Lisa told David one day as she was setting up her new, more reliable insulin pump. What do you mean? David asked. When it was just me, it was easy to think what's the point when I was feeling down. But now I think about how scared you were that morning when you found me, and I never want to put you through that again. Taking care of myself is a way of taking care of you too. David's work life had improved as well. Having something to look forward to at home made him more focused and productive during the day. His boss had noticed the change and given him more interesting projects. David found himself speaking up in meetings, offering ideas, even volunteering for assignments that would have intimidated him before. You seem different lately, his coworker Tom had commented one day. More confident or something, I guess. I am, David had replied, thinking about Lisa waiting at home with whatever new artwork she was excited to show him. Lisa's art had flourished in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. Her graphic novel about urban loneliness had evolved into something much more hopeful. Instead of just depicting isolation, it now showed how connection was possible, how strangers could become family, how one moment of caring could change everything. I want to dedicate it to you, Lisa told David one evening, showing him the nearly completed manuscript. You don't need to do that, David said, though he was clearly touched by the gesture. Yes, I do, Lisa insisted. This story exists because of what happened between us, because you showed me that paying attention to each other matters. The graphic novel, titled The Moment Everything Changed, had caught the attention of a publisher. Lisa's agent was optimistic about getting it picked up, which would mean Lisa could potentially make a living from her art, something she had always dreamed of but never quite believed was possible. I keep thinking about how different my life would be if you had just walked past my door that morning, Lisa said one night as they were getting ready for bed. I almost did, David admitted. I was so focused on getting to work on time, on not being late for that presentation. If my grandmother hadn't raised me to pay attention when people need help, but you did stop. Lisa said, that's what matters. You chose to care about a stranger. David thought about that choice often. It would have been so easy to keep walking, to assume someone else would handle whatever was happening in apartment to be. Most people would have made that choice, and no one would have blamed them for it. Do you ever wonder if we were supposed to meet? Lisa asked. Like, maybe all the things that led up to that morning, your sister being diabetic. So you recognized the signs, me moving into the apartment below yours, my insulin pump failing. That specific night, maybe it was all connected somehow. I don't know about fate, David said, but I do know that the best thing that ever happened to me started with the worst day of your life. Maybe that's how the best things work, Lisa mused. They come disguised as ordinary moments when you're not even looking for them. Their relationship had become the foundation that made everything else in their lives better. David had started taking photography classes, inspired by Lisa's artistic vision, but wanting to find his own creative outlet. Lisa had joined a support group for young adults with diabetes, finding community with others who understood her daily challenges. They had also become more involved in their building and neighborhood. The elderly woman in 1A now knew she could call on them if she needed help with groceries. The young couple with a new baby in 3C knew David and Lisa were available for emergency babysitting. They had created the kind of community David had always hoped to find in the city. Remember when you said you felt invisible here? David asked Lisa one evening as they were walking home from dinner with their neighbors. That feels like a different life, Lisa replied. I can't imagine feeling invisible when I'm with you. As they climbed the stairs to their apartment, David's old apartment that had become theirs, David reflected on how much had changed. 6 months ago, he had been a lonely guy going through the motions of city life. Tonight, he was coming home to someone who loved him, someone who saw him clearly and chose to build a life with him. The sketch Lisa had given him from the hospital was now framed and hanging in their living room, next to photos from their adventures around the city and a painting Lisa had made of the building where they lived. It served as a reminder of where their story began, with one person paying attention when another person needed help. "Thank you," Lisa said suddenly as David unlocked their door. "For what?" "For saving my life, for visiting me in the hospital, for bringing me art supplies, for moving me in, for all of it. Thank you for letting me," David replied, "for trusting a stranger who knocked on your door." As they settled in for the evening, David realized that saving Lisa's life had been just the beginning. The real gift had been everything that came after: the friendship, the love, the sense of belonging, the way they had helped each other become better versions of themselves. That Tuesday morning had started as the most ordinary day, but it had become the day that changed everything, and David knew that no matter what the future held, he would always be grateful for the moment he chose to stop and listen when someone needed help.